Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you a surprising and chilling story. Let's learn the story of Elowen Vance, a trauma nurse who literally faced death and came back with shocking revelations about Lucifer, hell, and secrets that religions hide. What she saw on the other side will challenge everything you believe. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now get ready for a journey that will change your view of good, evil, and the power of love. My life has never been about awesomeness. As a trauma nurse at Central Los Angeles Hospital, my routine revolved around emergencies, saving lives, and often losing the battle to time. That's how I handled things, focusing on the numbers, the protocols, and the next victim who needed me. There was no room for spirituality, faith, or bigger issues. Maybe because I saw the worst of humanity: brutal accidents, senseless violence, tragedies that seemed to steal any idea of a divine plan. That night, the emergency room was a battlefield. A chain accident on the main highway had brought more patients than beds. The air was charged with adrenaline, and the incessant sound of heart monitors and doctors' orders filled the space. I passed a man with multiple leg fractures, helped a young woman with a serious laceration on her arm, and responded to a call from Dr. Monroe, who needed help intubating an unconscious woman. "We need to stabilize her now, or we will lose her," he shouted, as he struggled to maintain control of the situation. My hands were steady, but my mind was already making calculations about who I would need to help next. There was no time to stop, nor to think. When the situation stabilized, I quickly moved to the next patient. It was at that moment, while crossing the trauma room, that the unexpected happened. My foot slipped into a pool of fresh blood. I lost my balance, and my body was thrown backwards. Everything seemed to slow down as I fell. I tried to hold on to something, but it was too late. My head hit the floor hard. The impact was more than painful. It was paralyzing. The sound around me became distant, as if I were listening underwater. The last thing I noticed were the faces of my fellow doctors around me, shouting my name. "Elowen, she needs help now." That's when everything went dark. At that moment, something changed. It wasn't just my body that had been knocked down. It felt like a part of me, something much deeper, was being ripped away from the reality I knew. When darkness enveloped me, I expected only emptiness, like a dreamless sleep. But instead, I was surprised by something that defied all logic. A gentle warmth began to envelop me, as if invisible hands were carrying me to a place where time and space did not exist. The feeling was indescribable, absolute peace, a calm that I had never experienced, not even on the best nights of my life. The darkness gave way to radiant light. It was no ordinary light. She didn't hurt her eyes. Instead, it was welcoming, as if each beam whispered words of love and safety. Everything seemed to vibrate with a living energy. I didn't know where I was, but somehow I felt like I was safe. Then, I began to notice something even more extraordinary. The light around me seemed to have a purpose, a consciousness. It was as if I were known completely. Every mistake, every doubt, every moment of suffering. And despite that, there was no judgment, just love. A presence began to form before me. At first, it was just a silhouette, but as it got closer, it became clear and unmistakable. A man, or something other than a man. He was so luminous that he seemed to be made of the very light that surrounded me. His eyes, deep and penetrating, conveyed a wisdom that went beyond anything I could understand. And at the same time, they conveyed a gentleness that calmed any fear. Before I even spoke, I knew who it was. Without explanations, without doubts, I simply knew. It was Jesus. "You still have a purpose on earth, Elowen," he said, his voice more a vibration than a sound. Each word seemed to penetrate my being, as if speaking directly to my soul. "But there is something you need to see before you go back." I was paralyzed. Part of me wanted to question, to protest, but another part, the part that felt the overwhelming peace and love of that moment, simply accepted it. Jesus reached out his hand to me, and without thinking, I grabbed it. Immediately, I felt a comforting warmth course through my entire being. "Come," he said with a serene smile. "I'm going to show you something that will change the way you see the world." When Jesus held my hand, I felt myself being pulled to a place beyond human description. The light around us intensified, and a feeling of movement, even though I wasn't walking, flying, or actually moving in any conventional way, came over me. It was like being transported in thought, but with a vivacity that made everything absolutely real. Suddenly, we were in a place of such sublime beauty that my words will never do it justice. It was as if the entire space around me pulsed with life. There was no sun, but light came from all directions, bathing the room in a soft, golden glow. I heard distant music, harmonies so pure and intense that it seemed like every note was made of love. The air vibrated with peace and joy. "Welcome to heaven," said Jesus with a smile, his voice full of gentleness. "Here, you will see something that few mortal souls can understand." As he spoke, my attention was caught by a group of angels moving in the distance. They were glorious, with resplendent wings that shone in every color of the rainbow. Their clothes seemed to be made of pure light, and their faces radiated a heavenly serenity. Despite their striking beauty, it wasn't their appearance that impacted me most. It was the feeling of love they emanated, a love so deep and powerful that it seemed to fill every corner of the place. But then, one angel in particular caught my attention. He was separated from the others, almost as if his presence dominated the room. It was impossible not to notice him. He was different, bigger, brighter, more perfect. His wings seemed to be made of crystal, reflecting light in all directions, and his countenance carried an almost hypnotic serenity. "Who is he?" I asked, unable to take my eyes off that being. "This," said Jesus, his voice now more solemn, "is Lucifer." My heart wavered. How was this possible? Lucifer, the prince of darkness, the symbol of evil, stood before me, but not as I knew him from stories or sermons. He didn't look like a demon or an evil creature. He was the most perfect of angels, beautiful beyond description. But he shouldn't be. My voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Jesus looked at me with compassion. "You will see that things are not always as religions describe them. Lucifer was the most beautiful and wisest of all the angels. He was the seal of perfection. But even in perfection, there is choice. And it was that choice that led to his downfall." As Jesus spoke, the scene around us changed. It was as if a curtain of light was removed, revealing images from a distant past. I was transported to a time before any fall, where heaven was a place of perfect unity. Lucifer, as Jesus explained, was the most exalted angel, a masterpiece of divine creation. I saw Lucifer walk through the golden streets of heaven, his wings reflecting each ray of light like a symphony of colors. He led choirs of angels in music that seemed to be the very essence of love. He was not just beautiful, he was the embodiment of perfection, radiating a glory that seemed to almost rival that of the Creator himself. "But that's where it started," said Jesus, his expression serious. He raised his hand, and the vision changed. I saw Lucifer look at his reflection in a golden surface. There was no arrogance initially, just admiration for his own perfection. However, over time, and time, in heaven, seemed to work differently. His admiration began to transform. He began to question, "Why can't I be worshipped as God? Why must my glory be less?" It was like watching a small flame grow into an out-of-control fire. Pride, subtle at first, took over Lucifer. He began comparing himself to the other angels, not to inspire himself, but to assert his superiority. Every act of humility that others demonstrated seemed, to him, a weakness. "I deserve better," he said, in a voice that boomed in all directions. His perfection, once a blessing, was now a curse, a source of dissatisfaction. Jesus showed me how Lucifer began to plant doubts in the hearts of other angels. He walked among them, whispering, "Why do we serve? Why does God withhold power and glory that could be ours?" His words, although soft, had a corrosive force. It was as if a shadow began to spread among the stars of heaven. Lucifer knew exactly what he was doing, Jesus said, his voice firm. He was not led by ignorance or weakness. He deliberately chose to reject love. I saw how Lucifer gathered a third of the angels, promising equality with God. They followed him, not out of coercion, but out of choice. The view of heaven changed once again, and I saw the war that followed. Michael leading the heavenly forces against Lucifer and his allies. It was a conflict that shook dimensions. Light and dark collided in a battle that seemed to echo across all realities. Ultimately, Lucifer and his followers fell. They were cast out of heaven, like fading stars, descending into the void. It was not God who punished them, Jesus explained. They chose separation. That was the real downfall. When the vision of the fall ended, the environment around us transformed again. We were in a dark and empty place, completely different from the heavenly glory before. There was an oppressive silence, as if the sound itself had been consumed by something invisible. Yet despite the emptiness around me, I felt the presence of Jesus at my side, his light shining through the darkness. "This," he said, his voice filled with compassion and sadness, "is what happens when someone chooses to separate themselves from love." I looked around, expecting to see something: fire, pain, demonic figures, but there was none of that. Instead, I noticed something much more terrifying: the complete absence of love. It was a cold, isolated void, with no connection to anything or anyone. My heart sank. "Is this hell?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Not as many imagine," replied Jesus, looking into the distance. "It is not a place created for punishment. It is a state of separation. Lucifer and those who followed him chose this. They rejected love, the only bond that connects all creation." I trembled, not from fear but from the realization of what this meant. There was no eternal fire, screams or torture. There was just the absence of God, which to me seemed much worse. Can they come back? Can Lucifer be forgiven? Jesus looked at me sadly, but also firmly. God's love is eternal, Elohim. It is always available, but those who choose to walk away need to want to come back. Lucifer and his followers not only reject love, they despise it. They know what they lost, but they chose pride above all else. I felt a lump in my throat when I heard that. "So evil isn't something God created?" "No," he replied. "Evil is a consequence of free will. God gave all his creatures the ability to choose, and evil was born when a choice was made to reject love." At that moment, I realized something I had never considered before. If free will was the most precious gift, it also carried the possibility of the worst. "Does this mean that evil can exist anywhere love is rejected?" I asked. Jesus nodded. "Yes, but remember, evil is never stronger than love. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. Even the smallest acts of kindness shine like beacons against the darkness." I then saw an image of earth. Little threads of light connected people to each other and to heaven. These threads brightened with every act of kindness, but weakened where pride, selfishness, and cruelty dominated. I also saw shadows, darkness creeping in, trying to break these connections. "Every choice you make feeds either light or darkness," said Jesus. "And even in the midst of darkness, a little spark of love can make all the difference." The depth of this truth hit me like a wave. Everything seemed clearer, simpler, and, at the same time, infinitely more complex. I understood that my life, every small act, had an impact that went far beyond what I could imagine. The darkness and light around me began to dissipate, like a veil slowly lifting. I was still standing next to Jesus, and the peace he emanated seemed to envelop my entire being. Yet there was a growing sense of urgency, as if the moment we shared was coming to an end. "It is time to return, Elohim," said Jesus with infinite gentleness. "Your mission on earth has not yet been completed. You need to carry that message forward." My heart sank. I didn't want to leave. The heaven, the peace and the truth he had discovered were so perfect that returning to earth seemed almost like a punishment. "I don't want to go," I confessed, my voice shaking. "I don't want to leave this behind." He looked at me with compassion. "What you saw here is engraved in your soul. You won't miss it, but there are people who need to hear what you learned. You can be the light that shines in the darkness for them." Before I could respond, a vision came over me. I saw my own body in the operating room. Doctors and nurses were racing against time to save me. My colleague and friend, Dr. Isaac Monroe, was leading the effort, his forehead covered in sweat as he barked orders. "More epinephrine, we can't lose her," he said, as another doctor applied compressions to my chest. I saw my sister, Sienna, in the hospital hallway, with her face pale and hands shaking, praying in silence, even though she didn't fully believe in God. The pain on his face cut me deep. I couldn't abandon her. Jesus touched my shoulder, bringing my attention back to him. "Remember, Elohim, love is the greatest power there is. No matter how small or insignificant an action may seem, it can change the course of a life, and you have the power to choose always." Before I could speak or protest, I felt a tug. as if an invisible force was dragging me. The light began to fade, and the feeling of peace began to be replaced by a growing heaviness. It was like falling from a great height, but without pain. Suddenly, I heard voices in the distance, like echoes. The familiar feeling in my body returned, but with it came excruciating pain. My chest burned, as if my heart was being squeezed from the inside. I opened my eyes abruptly, gasping as a beam of artificial light blinded me. It was back. "She's back," I heard Dr. Monroe's relieved voice. "Continue monitoring." I looked around, confused, as my brain tried to process what had happened. The memories of heaven, Jesus, and everything I saw were still vivid, but at the same time, I felt like I was being dragged into reality. Tears streamed down my face but they weren't from pain. They were tears of gratitude and understanding. My heart, which had stopped minutes before, was now beating faster than ever. I was alive, but something inside me had changed forever. When I woke up in the intensive care unit, the world seemed different, not because I was in a strange environment, surrounded by machines and monitors, but because I was no longer the same person. With each blink, I saw flashes of heaven, of Jesus' gaze, and of the truth he showed me. I knew I had survived for a reason, and that reason was much bigger than myself. The first person to visit me was Dr. Isaac Monroe. He entered the room with a tired smile, still wearing his lab coat, and pulled a chair close to my bed. "You nearly scared us to death," he said, with a tone that mixed relief and exhaustion. I smiled, but the tears came before I could respond. "Isaac, I saw something I can't explain." My voice was hoarse, but the weight of the words was stronger than the fatigue. He raised his eyebrows, intrigued. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, trying to organize my thoughts. "I was there. I don't know how to explain it, but I was with Jesus. He showed me things about heaven, about evil, about Lucifer. It's not how we were taught. It's different, much deeper." My heart was racing as I spoke, trying to convey the magnitude of what I experienced. Isaac leaned forward, clearly uncomfortable. "Elowin, you suffered a cardiac arrest. Near-death experiences can cause very vivid hallucinations." His brain was under immense stress. "It wasn't a hallucination," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It was real, more real than that." I pointed to the room around me. I saw things that changed my life. He looked at me skeptically, but there was something in his eyes, a reluctant curiosity. "I can't say I believe all this, but I can see that you do," he replied finally. Maybe that's enough. The days that followed were challenging. The memories of the experience were still fresh, but at the same time, the world around me felt incredulous. My sister, Sienna, arrived later that day. She entered the room with a worried look, holding my hand tightly. "You scared me so much, Elle," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I thought I was going to lose you." "I thought so too," I replied, shaking his hand. "But something happened. Something I need to tell you." As I spoke, I saw her expression change from concern to disbelief. "Elowin, you had a serious accident. Your brain probably—" "It wasn't my brain," I interrupted her, conviction growing in my voice. "It was real, Sienna, and I need you to listen to me." However, she stood up, clearly uncomfortable. "Maybe we should talk about this later," she said, before leaving the room. I felt a pang of pain, but I knew that the truth I carried was greater than anyone's doubts. Isaac continued to be a source of support, even if he was reluctant to accept my experience. He encouraged me to focus on my physical recovery, but I knew my real work was just beginning. Returning to the hospital and resuming my routine seemed irrelevant now, but at the same time, I realized that it was there, in that place of pain and suffering, that I could begin to spread the light that Jesus had shown me. My physical recovery was quick, but the same could not be said about the process of adapting to what I had experienced. Every morning I woke up, I felt a kind of emptiness, as if the earthly world was no longer enough. However, along with this emptiness, there was a certainty. I was alive for a reason, and that reason was to spread the love and light that I had seen in heaven. Returning to the hospital was challenging. The emergency room, once a place where I operated with almost automatic precision and efficiency, now felt different. I saw each patient, each colleague, from a new perspective. They were not just bodies in need of physical healing. They were souls, connected by invisible threads that I now knew existed. My first night back was a test of my new vision. A young man arrived at the hospital in critical condition after a shooting. As we worked frantically to save his life, I saw the fury and despair in his eyes, even though he was unconscious. Before, I would have only focused on physical injuries, but now, something has driven me to do more. "He needs surgery immediately," Isaac said, bringing me back to the moment. As we prepared the young man for the operating room, I murmured a silent prayer, asking for divine love to reach him, even if he didn't know it. Later, while he was in recovery, I sat by his bed. He opened his eyes for a brief moment and looked at me, confused but grateful. "I saw something good," he whispered, before falling asleep again. His words hit me deeply. I didn't know what he had experienced, but I felt that maybe, just maybe, that thread of light had reached his soul. My sister Sienna, however, remained distant and skeptical. "Are you well? Or is this some kind of trauma that you are trying to rationalize?" she asked weeks later, when I invited her home for dinner. "It's not trauma, Sienna," I replied, calmly. "I know it's hard to believe but I saw things that changed everything. And more than that, I feel like my mission now is to do what I can to spread love and kindness." She crossed her arms, clearly uncomfortable. "And how do you intend to do that? Turn every day into a moral lesson?" I smiled at her, not in anger, but in understanding. "No, Sienna, it's not about preaching. It's about living in a way that people can feel like there's something bigger." Despite her resistance, I began to notice small changes in her. Maybe it wasn't my words, but my actions that were beginning to speak for themselves. As the days went by, I started implementing small acts of kindness into my work. From listening more patiently to holding the hands of patients who were scared, I realized that these simple acts created bigger waves than I imagined. It was as if each of these gestures strengthened those threads of light that I had seen during my experience. That's when Isaac E., who still maintained his skepticism, came to me on a night shift. "Elowin," he said, hesitantly, "I don't know if I believe everything you told me, but you look different. And I think maybe that's enough to make me question some things." I smiled, feeling confirmation that I was on the right path. "You don't have to believe it, Isaac. You just need to choose love, every day. That's all that matters." As time passed, the lessons Jesus taught me during my near-death experience began to integrate into my everyday life. However, there was one truth that I couldn't ignore. Pride, so subtle and deceptive, was a constant threat. I knew that if Lucifer, the most perfect of angels, had succumbed to pride, I also needed to be vigilant against him. This reflection began to influence my choices. I asked myself, how many times in the hospital had my ego gotten involved in my work? How many times have I done things seeking recognition rather than genuine love? I remembered the nights I boasted about saving a life, as if my skill alone was responsible. Now I realized how these moments, although unintentional, were little traps of pride. One night during a particularly challenging surgery, I found myself dealing with these thoughts. Isaac and I were working to remove fragments of glass from the abdomen of a young woman who had been in a car accident. "Good technique, L," said Isaac, as I handled the instruments. In the past, a compliment like that would have inflated my ego. Now I just smiled and murmured, "Just doing my part." After the surgery, as I walked through the hospital corridors, I saw the patient's family anxiously waiting for news. Their expressions of relief and gratitude when I told them everything was fine touched me deeply. But instead of feeling like it was my merit, I felt like an instrument. It was a humbling but incredibly powerful feeling. I didn't need glory, I just needed to do good. Jesus had taught me that love is the most powerful force in the universe, and now I understood why. Love does not seek recognition, he simply is. It manifests itself in the smallest gestures, a smile, a word of encouragement, a decision to forgive rather than judge. I noticed this in every interaction, from the patients I treated to my everyday conversations with my sister. Sienna, although still reluctant to accept my experience, began to change. During one of our conversations, she finally admitted, "I don't know if I believe what you saw, but you look so at peace. This is real. This, I see. Your words were a milestone for me. I didn't need to convince anyone that heaven was real or that I had seen Jesus in Lucifer. My job was to live in a way that reflected divine love and, through that, perhaps inspire others to do the same." Pride, as Jesus had shown, was the most powerful weapon of evil. It was subtle, infiltrating the purest intentions. But the love was even stronger. He disarmed pride, healed the wounds it caused, and connected souls to one another. Each day was a choice, and although I knew it wouldn't be perfect, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Jesus had given me a mission, and that mission was simpler than I imagined, spreading love through my actions. And as I did this, I knew I was strengthening the light, both within myself and in the world around me. 6 months after my near-death experience, I was sitting in my small apartment in Los Angeles, reflecting on everything that had changed. The noise of the city still came through the window, but now it was just a background. My mind was focused on something bigger, on a truth that I had lived and needed to share. For a long time, I kept my experiences to myself and a few people close to me, like Isaac and Sienna. However, something in my heart said it was time to tell my story to the world. Not because I sought attention, but because I understood that love and choices that strengthened the light needed to be experienced and understood by everyone. Each person had the potential to change themselves and the world around them. That night, I decided to write about my experience for the first time. I opened my laptop, looked at the blank screen, and typed the first few words. This is not a story of tragedy. It's a story of love, light, and choice. The memories came in a flood, clear and vivid as the day I woke up in the ICU. I wrote about the accident, about the indescribable peace I felt as I entered the light, about the compassionate gaze of Jesus, and the majesty of Lucifer before his fall. I told you about the pride that destroys and the love that heals, about free will as humanity's greatest gift and greatest challenge. I didn't omit anything, not even the doubts and resistance I faced upon returning to Earth. As I wrote, I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of all the people who face daily choices between light and darkness, between love and selfishness. It was the story of a world that constantly struggles to find the balance between good and evil. When I finished, I looked at the text and felt a peace similar to the one I experienced in heaven. I knew not everyone would believe it, but that didn't matter. It wasn't about convincing, but about planting a seed of love and reflection. A few weeks later, my story was published on a small spirituality website. I didn't expect it to have much of an impact on, but the messages started arriving. People shared how my words had touched their lives, how they had inspired small changes in their attitudes. It was then that I realized that Jesus was right. Even the smallest acts of love can create bigger waves than we imagine. My sister, Sienna, was one of the last to read the story. When she called me, her voice was hesitant, but there was something different about it. "Elowen," he began, "I don't know if I believe it all, but thank you. Your story made me think, maybe there is something bigger after all." His recognition, although small, was yet another confirmation that my purpose was being fulfilled. I wasn't trying to change the whole world at once, but I was doing my part, one heart at a time. Today, as I look at my life, I realize that my mission is not over. Each new day is an opportunity to strengthen the light, to live in accordance with what I have seen and learned. Jesus' message is clear in my mind. Love is the most powerful force in the universe. No matter how dark the darkness, a single act of love can light it up. And so, with each choice, I continue to write my story, not just in words, but in actions that, I hope, one day become part of something bigger. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.